All right, again, I guess I'm live. All right, beloved, greetings. I want to talk about some thoughts. I want to just share some thoughts, final thoughts, and questions as regards this whole issue. Painful, sometimes complicated, set of questions concerning divorce and remarriage. Divorce and remarriage. On this theme, and this will be my final message now. And this may come as a disappointment, both, to you and to myself, because to tell you the truth, I'm not as dogmatic as I would want to be on the subject. I'm sort of still in a flux concerning the issue. I used to be very dogmatic. It was just clear-cut issue for me. Used to be. Not any longer. And therefore, I come as a, disappointment, disappointment for many, because I can't just, really say as it should be. By the way, the Bible teacher ought to be able to be dogmatic on most issues as regards the gospel, but this issue ain't one that directly connected to the gospel, even though it is vital and so forth. But there are some things that aren't crystal clear to me, and maybe I'm being pushed by the existential situation and circumstances. I've just seen so many, broken families and cases where it is just hard to make a clear-cut decision. So anyway, I've titled this message as some further thoughts or questions on the subject of divorce and remarriage. Well, let's go without further ado. Okay, the first question concerns a couple of questions concern the law on divorce as given in Deuteronomy 24 verses 1 through 4. Let me read to you again so that you get the context, okay? So Deuteronomy 24 verse 1 through 4 says, "When a man hath taken a wife and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, because he hath found some uncleanness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement and give it in her hand, and send her out of his house. And when she's departed out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife. And if the latter husband hate her, and write her a bill of divorcement, and giveth it in her hand, and sendeth her out of his house, or if the latter husband die, which took her to be his wife, her former husband, which sent her away, may not take her again to be his wife. After that she is defiled, for that is an abomination before the Lord, and thou shalt not cause the land to sin, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance." All right, so this is the stipulation concerning divorce and remarriage as well in the Old Testament. All right, here's my question. Question number one: if every divorce, by definition, is null and void, and all subsequent marriage is nothing but a continuous adultery, as is, in parentheses, the opinion of those who believe in the absolute unbreakableness or indissolubility of marriage, the Roman Catholics, some Protestant denominations, and scattered Baptist groups also believe that no divorce, and of course they're based on the words of the Savior himself, so that anybody, whosoever marries her who's been divorced committeth adultery, and he who divorces his wife except before fornication causes her to commit adultery, and so forth. You know the passages. I've dealt with them in my first video. By the way, I would still recommend you go and watch it, even though it is rather long. Both English version and Russian came out, over an hour long. I'm not happy about it, but then my wife told me, look, the teaching is weighty. It is comprehensive. It is just hard to make it short. You've got to, lay out the foundation. So that's what I try to do in my first installment on this subject of, marriage, divorce, and remarriage. So anyway, so let me read again this question. If every divorce, as some say, Roman Catholics, the Protestant Reformed churches, if every divorce by definition is null and void, it is not a real thing, because what God hath joined together, let no man separate, put asunder. So that whatever the stamp that you place in your ID, any papers, it really matters not, because God still views you as one flesh union. So you're supposed to be together. There's no divorce whatsoever. So if every divorce is null and void, and all subsequent marriage, all the subsequent marriages are nothing but a continuous adultery, why does this law of divorce call the second guy a husband and the woman as his wife? Okay, as it does. Okay, so she's departed out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife, says verse 2 of Deuteronomy 24. And then let her husband hate her and finds, again, write her a bill of divorcement, give it to her hand, and send her out of his house. Or if the latter husband die, and so that why does the passage call the second man a husband if he is no husband? In the mind of Roman Catholics, Protestant Reformed churches, is just a continuous adultery thing. All right. Question number 2. Why? And this is more important. It's not just words. Why is the return of the wife to her former husband? The passage talks about it. Why is the return of the wife to her former husband, in parentheses, which should be really called her only real husband? All the subsequent guys are no husbands, but adulterers in the mind of, people like that. Why is that scenario, which ought to be desirable, clearly forbidden in no uncertain terms in the passage? Because it says, verse 3 and 4 of Deuteronomy 24. So if the latter husband hate her and write her bill of divorcement and gives it in her hand and sends her out of the house, or if the latter husband dies, which took her to be his wife, her former husband, says verse 4, which sent her away, may not take her again to be his wife. After that she is defiled, for that is abomination. Now wait a second. It ought to be just the most desirable scenario, because he is the real husband. There's still one flesh. All the subsequent marriages are just a bunch of adultery. So that's a serious question, and I have not to this day heard a good answer for that. Usually what people do, Professor Engelsman, David Engelsman of Protestant Reformed churches, has said, well, it's been rescinded, it's been abrogated by Christ, so therefore Deuteronomy 24 is no longer applicable anyway. So that's their cop out of the situation. Nevertheless, the Lord gave that law. Now, here's my next question. Question number 3, which deals with that. What was the purpose of giving the law of divorce in Deuteronomy 24, which we just read? What was the purpose? Now, it is understood by all the occasion for giving it, as Jesus says himself, because of the hardness of your hearts. Okay, as he says in Matthew 19, in the parallel passage in Mark 10. So because of the hardness of your hearts that Moses suffered you this bill of divorcement and so forth. That's the occasion. I'm talking about God's purpose. What was the purpose or design of that particular law? All right? And was it, I'm speculating, was it just or merely to regulate adultery in the lives of reprobate Israelites? Hardness of your heart. So you guys are reprobates. Here's the law for you because you're reprobates anyway. Just to make it look better, because now you have a piece of paper which says, well, this wife is no longer the wife. She's been given this bill of divorcement. just to give it an appearance of a legitimate practice. Is that the design of it? I think it's a valid question. Again, David Engelsman says, well, the point of that law was just to protect the wife so that she does not become sort of a ping pong ball, sort of bouncing here and there. No, if you want to divorce her, no, she may not return to you. Therefore, think twice about it. Well, that's a nice humanistic explanation, but it does not give the full justice to what the passage itself says, that it would be an abomination before the Lord if she returns. So that there's something intrinsically wrong with being reunited to your former spouse. The passage says it very clearly. And the fact that Jesus says, well, that wasn't from the beginning, does not make it into a null law. It was still a law. And so what's the point of it? All right. Now we live... here's the thing. I get into hot water, and as I thought I was going to get with this teaching, because, again, I'm not as dogmatic on the subject as I used to be, and there are some people whom I know and whom I love deeply, who are my good friends, and, of course, brethren in the Lord, otherwise united in the gospel and so forth. They take this no divorce ever and no, very strict position. Whereas I've sort of shifted away from that a bit, because as far as, yes, the perfect design for the marriage, as far as me and my wife, no divorce, perish the thought, and so forth, until death do us part. And we're to reflect, those who are in the Lord, married in the Lord, we're to reflect the mystery of Christ and his church. No divorce whatsoever. So that's good. Nevertheless, since we're surrounded by cases of, broken, deficient families and de facto or de jure remarried people, we gotta take that into consideration. Again, the PRC, for instance, they just simply won't allow people like that to join their church. They just shrug them off. Okay, they're just tough luck. I mean, you either go back, find your former spouse, or, well, I can't do it because, see, guys, she's been, I don't know where and so forth. Well, just tough luck. I mean, I've been in situations where I didn't know what to say. And to me, it is a grave weakness of this doctrine if it cannot be evangelically applied with consideration and mercy. Since we're all sinners, we all need mercy, and we need an evangelical solution, not just saying, well, it's just tough luck, boy, So anyway, next passage. But I'm giving you these questions. Maybe I'll be persuaded if something comes up. I spend more time in scriptures and in meditation. Maybe I'll change my mind. Where I stand right now, these are just questions that I point to those who are doggone sure that is to be no divorce and no subsequent remarriage, like people from the PRC, for instance. Okay, let me proceed. 1 Corinthians 7:15 says, but if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God hath called us to peace. All right, but if again, in the context, this is, well, if they're willing to live with you, you shouldn't divorce them. And even your kids are holy, not unclean, because the unbelieving spouse is getting sanctified and so forth. The passage 7:14 says that even your children are holy, therefore you shouldn't be divorcing your spouse. If they're willing to abide with you, just fine, be with them. But if they don't want to live with you, let them depart. And here's an interesting thing. It says, brother, let him depart. So your unbelieving spouse, if they want to just proceed with their life, break in bed, whatever they want to do, well, a brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God hath called us to peace. Now, Again, the mentioned by earlier, this theologian David Engelsman makes much of this literal rendering, which the KJV faithfully translates as not under bondage. Most of the modern versions translate this passage in this particular clause under bondage as not bound. A brother or sister is not bound in such cases. Even our Russian synodical translation, which I use for preaching and teaching and so forth, has that really is not bound. And Engelsman, he castigates, he bashes and slays this paper dragon. Oh, it makes all the difference in the world because they're still bound by the law of the marriage as long as he liveth. But the proper the proper sense is that they're not under bondage, that they're not enslaved. And that's true, that the Greek verb here, the grammatical construction is that a person is not enslaved, literally, in such a case. A brother or sister is not enslaved. Here's my question, though. And it'll be question number 5 in my list of questions. If a brother or sister is not under bondage, is not enslaved, but still bound as those who are as the proponents of the absolute indissolubility of marriage, but still bound to their the departed unbelieving spouse, then in what sense precisely are they said to be not under bondage? What does this mean? See, they say, well, it may mean that, you don't have to run after them and beg them and entreat them. Please come back. We're one flesh. Let's live together and so forth. So that's the meaning. I guess they say, well, not under bondage so that you're not obligated to chase your unbelieving spouse all over place. God hath called you to peace in a sense that you're still bound to her. You can't remarry and so forth because you're still one. But you're not under bondage. You're not obligated to run around chasing your unbelieving spouse. That's the sense that they attributing to this expression. I used to buy it. I don't now. And here's my subsequent question. Question number 6. Can the unequal yoke of marriage with an unbeliever, and that's 2 Corinthians chapter 6, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. Remember the passage. So can the unequal yoke of marriage with an unbeliever be considered a form of bondage where you do have some restriction to your freedom of worship and you're being bound? Can it be considered as a form of bondage? And if not, why not? Now, I admit that 2 Corinthians 6, this instruction not to be unequally yoked with unbelievers, is broader than just marriage. But it certainly does include marriages, and pastors are wise to use that passage to warn their parishioners or members, instructing them that they shouldn't be seeking marriage unions with unbelievers, because that would be being united under the unequal yoke with an unbeliever. Of course, it goes beyond that. It's all partnerships, intimate partnerships, and whatever else that you get into this close kind of partnership with an unbeliever, that you're committed to a cause which is not the cause of Jesus Christ, is not a healthy thing. So what's common between following Christ and following actually Belial or the world? So that's the point of Paul in that passage. Anyway, so if the marriage with an unbeliever is not a yoke, then why not? Okay, next passage and some questions. Again, that this is 1 Corinthians 7, verses 27 and 28. Paul says, art thou bound unto a wife? Seek not to be loosed. Please follow me as I read the special scriptures and the logic of the apostle. Art thou bound unto a wife? Seek not to be loosed. Art thou loosed from a wife? Seek not a wife. But if thou marry, thou hast not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she hath not sinned. Nevertheless, such shall have trouble in the flesh, but I spare you. You know, this is the logic of Paul. He particularly says he is in favor of being single. Clearly so. Not in forced celibacy as the Roman Catholics do, but Paul is clearly in favor of being single. For that is better in Paul's mind. So we take that. But I'm especially focused on the first lines. Art thou bound to fight? Seek not to be loosed. Here's my question. It happens to be question number 7. If the only way of being loosed from a wife is really through her death, in the logic of those who don't believe that any divorce is possible, or that the divorce is does not affect anything in the mind of Roman Catholics and Protestant Reformed churches and so many other people. So if the only way of being loosed is through death of your wife, then you're loose from the law of marriage. Why then does Paul even waste his breath and instructs, seek not to be loosed, as he says? Because it should be understood in the mind of those who say, well, there's the only death looses you, and so forth. So, and Paul says, seek not to be loosed. So what is he saying? He's saying, seek not to shorten her days, seek not to poison her or do anything, or try not to kill your wife in order to be loosed from your marriage. As though the command not to kill were not the most basic, axiomatic, clear given for all Christians across the board. Do you get my question? It ought to be so obvious to even waste the apostolic breath in saying, well, seek not to kill your wife. Oh boy, that's a revelation that is clearly understood. I mean, we remember the Sermon on the Mount. We remember the commandments. Absolutely. Not even thinking evil, even hating thy brother, or not loving enough. I mean, clearly, we're to love our spouses most clearly. So, well, seek not to do something that you'd get rid of her and be loose from the marriage. That would be sort of a strange instruction if you follow my drift, okay? Question number 5. No, it's really question number 8. Next line in this passage, verses 27, 28 of 1 Corinthians 7. If the widowed persons are here in view, all right? So, art thou loose from a wife? So, in the mind of those who, well, art thou loose? Well, the only way is that the husband or wife is dead. So, seek not a wife, so you're widow. But if thou marry, thou hast not sinned. So that's what I'm zeroing in. So if the widowed persons are here in view, why does he even have to add in, if thou marry, thou hast not sinned? So you don't sin if you marry. Seeing that it is, again, a universal knowledge and agreement, and everybody recognizes that. If you're a widower, or a widow, yeah, your husband or wife is in the grave. Of course you're free to marry, only in the Lord. Yes, there's this stipulation of Paul says, and again, it's readily understood and agreed upon by all Christians across the board. Yes, in the Lord, yes. Free to marry anyone they please, only in the Lord. So why does he say, if thou marry, thou hast not sinned? Okay? How can you sin? You know, you're free from the law of marriage. In Romans 7, he says that the wife is bound to her as long as he lives, so that while her husband lived, if she married now, that she'd be called an adulteress. But if her husband be dead, she's free. So it's in a universal knowledge. Everybody agrees upon that. So if you marry, you have not sinned. So in my understanding, but I won't make it a dogmatic point because, again, most, even myself, a few years ago, I would argue from the opposite end. But it is my current thinking that from verse 11, 12 to the others, to the rest, as in not the Lord, but I say, those who are actually find themselves in this place of being unequally yoked with an unbelieving spouse. So you live in this relationship. So if they're willing to live with you, fine. Don't seek a divorce, fine. But if they depart, let them depart. So if you're loosed from the wife, in my opinion, he does talk about divorce in this case. So they're gone. Your unbelieving spouse is gone. So if you marry, seek not a wife, but even if you do, so because he says, it's better for you to abide as I am. But if you want to get married, fine. You're not going to be sinning by that. This is my understanding, at least right now. So those are questions as regards this somewhat complicated, certainly complex and painful, knotty issue of divorce and remarriage. In churches, it is a painful, living, pastoral thing. So, and again, I would emphasize this: only God is the Lord of our conscience. Only He has the last word. So we must act out of faith, according to the best we've found or gleaned from scriptures, so that issues like that should be left to the consideration of the properly, ordained elders, whoever is in charge in that local assembly, that local church. We're not to impose our views. And even if for myself, if I take the view that as far as my marriage, no divorce spares the thought, just until death do us part, and so that one flesh, what God has joined together, let no man take asunder, and so forth. Yes, that is enforced. But to others, we can, manifest mercy, consideration, and understanding that in this broken, sin-ridden world, people do separate, and so that we avoid judgmentalism, toward those who've been perhaps remarried and so forth. And there are situations, at least I see in Scripture, that do allow for that sort of thing, even though it's not normal, it is not a perfect design, but nevertheless. So here I stand on this issue, and I hope it was somewhat instructive and useful for you guys. And I want to leave this topic for now and proceed to other things. All right, may God bless you all.